this evening for Men's Elite Level Hockey Culture Context Challenge and Change. I'll start by letting you know that I'm on Wolastoqey territory, and I'd ask that the attendees reflect on the colonial relations of power that allow us and facilitate meetings and discussions such as this one tonight. The purpose of this event, and I think it's happening on a really interesting day, given that we've had the announcement now that there will be charges laid in the sexual violence accusations against the 2018 Men's World Junior Championship team. We know that we started this process, Shannon, Cheryl, Teresa, and I, to open up a space to talk about ways to address men's hockey culture and to think about ways that it could be a better, more joyful, safer, more equitable space for all. So we've been really fortunate to have such great speakers with us. The event tonight is sponsored by St. Thomas University's Canada Research Chair in Physical Culture and Social Life and St. Mary's University's Scott McCain and Leslie McCain Center for Sport, Business, and Health. Our organizers are Cheryl McDonald, Teresa Fowler, Shannon Moore, and me, Christy Elaine. I'll turn it over to Shannon to introduce our speaker this evening.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to also pop in the chat relevant information this time in regards to the series and the biographies of all of our speakers, if you're interested. So this evening, we are very excited to be joined by Charlene Weaving, who is a professor and current chair of the Human Kinetics Department at St. Francis Xavier University. Weaving is a past president of the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport. Weaving's research involves feminist sport philosophical analysis of gender in sport and has published on research on objectification, for example, athletes posing nude, Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Issue, and ESPN Body Issue. They have also published on equity, women, body checking in hockey, USports lack of women coaches, uniform regulations, and pregnant athletes. Weaving was awarded the Faculty of Science Outstanding Teaching Award in 2007 and the Heather Reid Distinguished Service Award for Outstanding Contributions in the Service of Philosophy of Sport in 2013. Tonight, Charlene Weaving is going to be speaking to us about sexism in hockey. And so I will turn it over. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A. I think we always have one participant who does a little tester for us, and I can't remember who that is, but if you're there and you can remember, could you please put a little tester in the Q&A for us so we can make sure that that function is working? And then I will be hosting the Q&A section at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Cheryl and Christy, Teresa, and Shannon for this invitation to participate. I'm really pleased to be here tonight, and thank you all for joining. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm living on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I grew up in Montreal and was the sister of a competitive hockey player. I can tell you all about the quality of French fries in various rinks across Quebec. In the 80s, girls were not encouraged to play hockey. Some 30 years later, my 9-year-old's ice time per week matches his age, and he plays in a mixed league. In Antigonish, Nova Scotia, where I'm located, girls have the option to play all girls or mixed. Around 5 years ago, I tried hockey skates for the first time and began playing in the Watt League, women over 30. The group is comprised of a medical doctor, nurses, teachers, numerous varsity alum, and there are 2 other faculty on my team. At our most recent game, me, the poli-sci, and psych prof ended up being a line of forwards. We are the weakest players, yet every shift we gave it our best and laughed as we got heckled from the bench for being considered the nerd line. I share this because on the drive home post the game, I reflected how hockey is worth fighting for. The joy that I see my son and his teammates experience, it is worth working for cultural change. And I see this lecture series as a critical path towards change. However, in order to create change, we first must recognize that there are issues that need to be addressed. In May of 2022, 2 stories surfaced involving sexual assault against women, specifically gang rape, committed by members of the Canadian Men's World Juniors hockey team, an alleged case in Nova Scotia in 2003, and a case in 2018. Hockey Canada's CEO and board of directors all removed themselves, and a new team is now in town, charged with rebuilding brand, reputation, and accountability. As we are nearing the 2nd anniversary of the scandal breaking, it is disheartening to report that little has changed. Players have still not yet been held accountable, as up until, I guess, about 5 hours ago, when it was announced that 5 players must report to surrender themselves to London, Ontario police. And I think it's fair to suggest that the culture in hockey, despite the public criticisms, sponsorship drops, and change in leadership, has not yet shifted in any meaningful way. In thinking about the scandal and the impact on the culture of hockey for women, in this presentation, I will analyze sexism in hockey. I clarify from the onset, I do not argue that the culture of junior hockey resulted in sexism in hockey. Rather, I make the case that these incidents have highlighted the prominence and extent of sexism in hockey culture. I've organized this talk via themes that I consider to be part of the complex puzzle of sexism in hockey culture. I note that there are additional themes that I could have incorporated. However, I opted to narrow the focus to these themes. I look forward to discussing after the presentation what other pieces of the puzzle we should include. The themes that I would cover, and I'll go over them individually, are as follows: women as puck bunnies, the other, men's hockey as the gold standard, and behavior expectations like a lady. I refer to feminist philosopher Iris Marion Young's work on the other. Young considers women to be framed as the other. For me, the scandal reinforced viewing women and women's bodies as commodities in heterosexual objectifying framing. I think it reinforced women's positioning in hockey as puck bunnies. Journalist Laura Robinson wrote about puck bunnies and sexual assault in Crossing the Line, Violence and Sexual Assault in Canada's National Sport in 1998. Hockey culture is plentiful with celebrations of puck bunnies. Robinson argued, and I quote, "In culture, sex is synonymous with hockey. It becomes a means to demonstrate aggressive, violent masculinity, and as such, it is frequently performed in a group so that teammates can witness one another's performance. But instead of performing on an ice rink, they use the female body," end quote. The perpetuation becomes that women only enjoy hockey or only fans of hockey because they'd like to be sexually involved with hockey players. This emphasizes women as sexual objects, and I think can have consequences on how then we view women hockey players. I also note that the popularity of hockey romance online books that have surged in promotion, or at least on my Instagram feed, most involve fictional stories about NHL ice hockey players establishing relationships with various women. Puck bunnies are discussed, the size of the player's stick, in some cases, think shades of gray, but instead filled with hockey sexual innuendos. I contend that these stories further contribute to promoting white male hypermasculinity and women as sexual objects. It would be remiss not to refer to ice girls in this section. For the last 150 or so years, cheerleading has changed significantly, according to Adams and Bettis. Cheerleading used to be considered a male-dominated sport and is now a staple in American schools, American life, popular culture, and the majority of participants are now women. Adams and Bettis argued that cheerleading has come to accommodate the meanings of normative femininity and offers a culturally appropriate space for some girls to embody what is known as ideal girlhood. Cheerleaders do not disrupt the gender order by disobeying gendered bodies. The NHL Ice Girls appeared in the 2001-2002 NHL season when the New York Islanders introduced to the NHL cheerleading. The Dallas Stars were not long to follow and launched their first Ice Girls squad for the 2002-2003 season. The main purpose of the Ice Girls was to help maintain the ice surface for the Stars at their home games. The maintenance was done during the 2 intermissions. The Ice Girls were instructed to quickly remove the snow that had accumulated around the goal and boards, and this had to be done in less than 2 minutes. The women used shovels to remove the snow and on occasion skated around the ice surface with flags promoting teams. Not all teams have both skaters and dancers, and some only have one or the other, most often the skaters. However, for the most part, all NHL Ice Girl programs across the league were relatively the same, and the girls performed nearly identical jobs. I highlight at this point that I find the name Ice Girls to even be problematic. By referring to a group of women 18 years old and older as girls involves trivializing and sexualizing them. I guess calling them Ice Girls is more sexy and fun versus referring to them as the Ice Women. At the 2013 IAAHF World Junior Hockey Tournament, cheerleaders were present. They did not act like Ice Girls, were not on the ice during period breaks to clean off the snow, but were located behind the nets on a raised dance platform, performing cheers and wearing tight, bright, and low-cut uniforms. Journalist Baker described it in the following manner. Cheerleaders in outfits of varying ridiculousness, a security tape neon yellow-green flapper dress with white knee-high boots for one game, a highly unflattering purple and silver pantsuit with white fur bolero for another, a blue and green V-neck leotard dress that would look great on a figure skater for most of the Russian games, did pretty much nonstop routines behind one net, but in a much swishier fashion than their Western counterparts, end quote. Back to the NHL, most teams have moved on from highly revealing outfits to having a co-ed cheer team, which actually has very few men. I quickly point out that the Chicago Blackhawks got rid of the Ice Girls in 2021 during the Kyle Beach investigation. Amidst this hypersexualizing hockey culture, I highlight that even women's hockey can promote women in a sexualizing manner. For example, on October 18th in 2020, USA Hockey tweeted the following: "Look good, feel good, play good." The tweet pictures a young girl hockey player wearing a bright, oversized pink hockey jersey and what seems like hockey pants. Her sleeves are rolled up and she appears to be in a hockey arena as there are trophies behind her. She has blue eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail with a few curls framing the side of her face. Yet she is not near an ice surface. Her stick, hockey gloves, or helmet are not even featured in the photograph. In the picture, the player is applying lip gloss with a long applicator and her lips are semi-parted. The girl does not smile and her gaze is directed towards the photographer. It seems to be a posed picture rather than capturing a moment. The caption, "Look good, feel good, play good," was met with backlash from journalists and athletes alike. The promotion sends the message that for young girls, the most basic imperative is to appear feminine to look good, and that satisfaction of this imperative is a condition, no less, of feeling good and playing good. It offers subtle illustration of McKinnon's analysis. And I quote, "In other words, men simply learning to be men learn not only about sports, but learn those things that become elevated, extended, measured, valued, and organized in and as sport itself. Women simply learning to be women do not learn those things, do learn the opposite of those things. So it's no news to any of you that being female and being athletic have been socially contradictory, and that being male and being athletic have been more or less socially synonymous. Femininity has contradicted masculinity, has been consistent with being athletic. Women get to choose between being a successful girl and being a successful athlete, end quote. The USA tweet again confirms the narrative that in order for girls and women to participate in hockey and play good, one needs to look good. And those conceptions of looking good is inscribed in the narrative. Here, looking good reflects traditional white, stereotypical heterosexual ideals of girls and women. The ideals manifest in what Locke calls the heterosexually successful woman. Given the pandemic and the lack of elite women's hockey that was being played in 2020, it seems odd and regressive that USA Hockey celebrate, promote, and in turn sexualize young girls. This method of promotion not only does nothing for the political and sporting authority of women, but also emphasizes a triple layered problem, given the apparently young age of the player photographed. Sport offers women the opportunity for empowering ownership of their bodies. The heterosexualization of women athletes, however, obstructs women and girls' realization of sport's emancipating and humanizing potential, since it casts their sexual appeal as more contextually normative than their sporting ability. Burke observes, furthermore, that the celebration of heterosexual attractiveness of a few women athletes occurs at the expense of establishing epistemic and political authority for women in sport, that the association of female sexual attractiveness and passivity, profitable for these individual women, gets in the way of sporting authority for all women. In the 1970s and 1980s, Love Baby Soft cosmetic company created problematic sexist advertisements to market their lip gloss products. One advertisement featured here has a young girl hugging a white teddy bear. Her hair is styled and her lips are glossy and prominent. And the caption reads, "Loves Baby Soft because innocence is sexier than you think." Collins analyzed these advertisements and refers to author Jane Caputi, who described the advert in the following way. The ad blatantly positions the young girl as a sex object and acknowledges that is her innocence that makes her such a suitable erotic target. It makes perfect pornographic sense. The moralistic ethic puts chastity next to the godliness and makes sex dirty, defiling a supposed bodily and spiritual purity. Sexual gratification of any kind then becomes all bound up, not only with taboo violation, but also with defilement, end quote. The October messaging from the USA tweet is especially problematic given that a month prior, in September of 2020, the International Ice Hockey Federation canceled all 5 of the U18 Women's World Champion tournaments in 2021. And here, pictured on this slide, are numerous responses from players and other individuals. According to journalist Michelle J., the IAAHF claimed that the cost of creating a bubble and testing all players was too much for the host nations as well as the IAAHF. This is conspicuous given that the IAAHF announced approximately a month earlier that the U20 Men's World Championship, also known as the World Juniors, would take place in a bubble in Edmonton, Alberta, with daily COVID-19 testing. According to Jay, quote, "This decision screams to me that the IAAHF does not care about the women's game. If it did, it would not have made a decision that will negatively impact the growth of the women's hockey for years to come. By continually putting less resources and time into the U18 level, they show they do not care about the women's game," end quote. In November of that same year, 2020, Tim Hortons, or Timmy's as it's affectionately known, partnered with Mattel to create a blonde Barbie hockey player and a black Barbie hockey player. Originally, there was only to be the blonde. However, due to the momentum of Black Lives Matter and criticisms about inclusivity, Tim's delayed the launch from August to November to incorporate a black doll. The Barbie hockey dolls appear in a typical Barbie box. The backdrop of the box features hockey rink images with Tim Hortons and Barbie displayed on the boards where advertisements would usually be featured. Both dolls have a hockey stick connected with plastic to their arms. However, the Barbie hands would not be able to actually hold a stick. And the dolls also have a hockey helmet and full cage attached to their other arm. Both dolls are also sporting long-haired ponytails. Cito examined whether the hockey Barbie is a feminist Barbie. She refers to the concerns about Barbie's idealistic and unrealistic physical dimensions and sexist contexts. This echoes my 2016 observation of the oddity in the creation of the swimsuit Barbie, a child's toy to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Issue, a magazine that celebrates the sexual objectification of women. And given the recent news that Sports Illustrated is now defunct, who knows what's going to happen with the swimsuit issue. Tim's Barbie might have feminist potential for the normalization of hockey playing women. However, it should be noted that hockey Barbie is without gloves and padding, does not seem functional to hold the stick, but she does wear lip gloss. On the other hand, 100% of the proceeds of the Tim's Barbie, which were retailing at its onset for $29.99, go to Hockey Canada's foundation to support girls hockey. On the back of the box, the message reads, Tim Hortons Barbie doll inspires girls to explore their limitless potential and encourages them that they can be anything, including a hockey player. Get on the ice with Barbie as she suits up in her Tim Hortons hockey jersey, grabs her helmet and hockey stick, and hits the ice with her team. It's game time. So she enters the rink with a whoosh, skates across the ice, and works with her teammates to get the puck towards the goal. In the first theme, I've argued that puck bunnies, hockey romance novels, ice girls, and promotional materials all form pieces of how women are perpetuated as sexual objects in hockey culture, and consequently, a sexist culture emerges. In this next section, I make the case that men's hockey is the gold standard and that women's hockey is perpetually compared to the men's game. Traditional stereotypes of men and women are reproduced in many sports through varying rules and regulations, which result in male and female versions of the same sport. Women ice hockey players do not have the same opportunity to flourish as men, resulting in continued male domination and reinforcement of gender hierarchy in hockey and society. Burke argued, quote, the male athletic body is held up as an exemplar of physicality, strength, power, athleticism, superiority, with a monopoly on the practices of violence and aggression. The female, by comparison, is considered incapable of playing in these sporting competitions because of perceived insufficiencies of her body. Hence, it is these sports which help to provide apparent justification for the hierarchy of gendered social assignments and positions in the contemporary sporting and social world, end quote. Some 10 years ago, I published an article with my honors student, who at the time was a varsity male hockey player, and our introduction went as follows. We argue that due to existing rule discrepancies, women hockey players do not have the same chance to flourish as male players do, because women are required to play without body checking. We argue that they cannot participate in the physicality that the game demands. They do not experience full bodily agency. They are not afforded the experience of using their bodies in a manner that exudes force, power, and domination. We believe that women's hockey is yet to truly flourish, and furthermore, we show that incorporating checking into the women's hockey game will enable the game and its players to flourish and experience full bodily agency. If women check in hockey, they would challenge the stereotypical constructs of masculinity and femininity. And it's critical to recognize that organized women's hockey, particularly from the early 1920s and 1940s, included rough play and fighting. Historical research by Carly Adams indicates that women's hockey games in that era were labeled as battles, and games were described as the girls on the ice have demonstrated that they are as good as scrappers as any of the boys' team, end quote. Heavy body checks, hooking, slashing, and fighting were all part of the women's game, which emulated the contemporary male hockey model. In the early 1900s, women and men played by the same rules, and women were more than capable of handling the physicality of body checking. Women's hockey players' ability to flourish has been decreased by removing the type of physicality experienced in body checking. In the article, we argued that body checking has not been part of the game because of paternalism and fear that women's bodies are too frail to handle body checking. Leslie Howe reinforced these claims. Women's participation in endeavor in any sorts represents a problem of traditional conceptions of gender and for traditional conceptions of appropriate sexual identity. Female athleticism challenges male sexual priority by applauding the active role that is central to the traditional conception of male sexual identity. Traditional conceptions of women emphasize her existence as a body with man as mind or spirit. This gets turned on its head by women's participation in sport. For although women is supposedly body, she is also defined as a passive body, end quote. In reflecting on these arguments some 10 years later, with most I continue to stand by, I believe that the women's game is considered to be an inferior product to the men's. For example, check out the social media posts that recently occurred during the women's U18 Canadian play. And I'll read some of them because the slide's a bit blurry. My 100-year-old grandfather can do a better, and he is blind and deaf, and he has no arms. Nothing about this video was impressive. Oh my God, so slow. This is the reason why people don't watch this crap. Nobody is watching. Looks like a beer league. I don't think women's hockey is a good idea. I don't suggest that if we include body checking that all of a sudden sexism is going to disappear in the women's game. Rather, I highlight that our expectations of women's bodily capacities impacts how we view and value women's bodies and women's hockey. Additional examples to support men's hockey as the standard, the IAAF announced on April 21st, 2021, that the 2021 Women's World Hockey Championship was canceled because of increased COVID-19 spread in Halifax, the intended tournament venue. The timing was horrific as some teams found out while they were at the airport getting ready to depart for Canada. The last-minute cancellation exemplifies that elite-level women's hockey is not afforded the same attention, care, respect, nor opportunity as the men's elite game. There was no plan B. The men's U18 IAAF tournament took place in Texas in the US. This imbalance demonstrates a yet grisly political reality behind the facades of feminist progressiveness. There is much discussion about the different equipment between men's and women's hockey. Primarily the focus, women hockey players wear full cages or visors. The rules are more loosey-goosey for the NHL. Half visors are permitted. One woman hockey player tweeted, "Y'all remember that clip where an NHLer asked a women's hockey player why they wear the helmet cages, and without missing a beat, she goes, 'We don't have dental, because I do.'" Talking about explaining the lack of coverage, the lack of support, and why they couldn't afford to have any damage to their teeth. I think for some that they see women's hockey as less thrilling because women wear full visors, full cages. For me, such a critique seems tied to traditional hypermasculine warrior, no safety kind of narratives. With the recent rise of record-setting attendance for the PWHL, this provides evidence that the women's game is thrilling and a worthy product. And that's all I'm going to say about the PWHL at this point. In this final theme, I make the case that despite the scandal, Hockey Canada thrived during the 2022 IAAF World Juniors. And I think there are more expectations put on women players to act a certain way. And the classic example is, of course, from Vancouver 2010. Approximately, 100 minutes after winning the gold medal in the women's ice hockey competition at the Vancouver Games, members of the Canadian team returned to the ice to celebrate their victory. It seems that the players thought that returning to the ice to celebrate would be appropriate, given the crowd had long departed. They congregated at center ice without their skates, wearing their jerseys and their Olympic gold medals. According to sporting traditions, celebrating such important victories as a team is a fundamental part of competitive sport. A ubiquitous accompaniment to such celebration is champagne or beer, often provided by the sponsors, which is both enthusiastically swigged by players and sprayed to other players, teammates, coaches, and anyone else in proximity. In most male team sports all around the world, celebrating with alcohol is both common practice and also occurs in the playing arena immediately after an important victory, and privately in the locker room once they leave the playing surface. So if you think of any baseball finals, basketball finals, even in the locker rooms, they're covered in plastic and all the players are wearing ski goggles for the champagne spraying. The Canadian players were no different. They sat at center ice, smoked cigars, drank cans of Molson Canadian beer, and gulped champagne. They posed for photographs and generally engaged in the familiar horseplay associated with celebrating victories, including pouring champagne into each other's mouths. At one stage, Colleen Sosterix drove the Zamboni around the ice, honking its horn and waving at the other players, having a great time. Unfortunately for the team, a few Canadian international journalists were still in the building, completing reports and so forth. In witnessing the players' actions, the journalists present seized the opportunity for a story and captured the events with their cameras. A few hours later, the team's private party was an international story, and the propriety of the antics became the subject of heated debate amongst international press. Given the extent and nature of the media coverage surrounding these events, the IOC announced that they would launch an investigation into the on-ice celebrations. Later, however, the IOC spokesperson at the time, Mark Adams, indicated there would be no formal investigation, but the IOC would continue to seek clarification of the events. The IOC director noted, "It's not what we want to see. I don't think it's a good promotion of sport values. If they celebrate in the change room, that's one thing, but not in public. We will investigate what happened." In an attempt to diffuse the situation, Hockey Canada issued an apology for the actions of the players. Quote, "In the excitement of the moment, the celebration left the confines of our dressing room and shouldn't. The team regrets that its gold medal celebrations may have caused the IOC or the COC, the Canadian Olympic Committee, any embarrassment. Our players and team vow to uphold the values of the Olympics moving forward and view this situation as a learning experience," end quote. The alcohol-fueled actions of all the players were considered troublesome. There was nothing particular unusual about what was going on here, at least not from a hockey perspective, as Canadian hockey has strong tradition of such celebration. For example, I think this originated from the 1972 Summit Series, where the winning team, their Canadian team, took to the ice, celebrated their achievement with beer and cigars. The fact that the Canadian players' post-game revelry provoked controversy when similar incidents involving male athletes, like the case of John Montgomery, were considered business as usual, suggests a gender double standard. So I've had this meme up here for the length of this section just to really, I think, try and highlight the points. What also occurred during those Vancouver Games is that John Montgomery, a skeleton athlete, won gold, and the sliding events were taking place in Whistler Village, got down, was walking from at the end of the course to the press where TSN had an open air booth, and someone handed him a pitcher of beer, which he proceeded to chug the whole way and on air throughout his interview. He became a celebrity, was featured on Oprah, and is now the host of The Amazing Race Canada. Whereas the women suffered all of these, this backlash. So this meme that was created indicates apologize for what? Having a penis, implying this gender double standard, that the only reason the women were faced criticism was because they are in fact women. I believe that some 10 years later, the women's team, women hockey players, are still held to higher moral expectations compared to men. They're constantly bombarded with pressure that they are role models for all Canadian girls. But what about the men? Should they not also experience pressure to be role models? Finally, I acknowledge that there's much more that I could say on this, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface. I believe that if we are to create change and challenge the sexist culture in hockey, that we need to first acknowledge that there are some significant problems. If we can't do that, we will all be skating on thin ice. So thank you very much, and I look forward to having a great discussion after.
Well, thank you very much, Charlene, for your presentation and your amazing PowerPoint choice of images for each of your sections. I will invite people to start putting questions in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I will get us started with a question, Charlene, if that's okay.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask about your co-authored publication Checking In, where you're understandably pointing to the paternalism and the lack of expectation in women's hockey. But I wondered, in a moment where we are trying to reduce toxic acts in the men's sport, which can involve body checking that causes long-term harm to male athletes, how do you reconcile that advocacy for what could be seen as more violence in the women's game when we're trying to get rid of it in the men's?
Right. I don't really reconcile that, or we didn't. If I recall, and I had to go back through the paper to prepare for this one, is that what some women players, and granted this was 10 years ago, argued that because of the lack of body checking, that they found that there was more dirty plays, plays that involved slew footing, plays that could involve different injuries. So they felt, and this is just some players' perspectives, that body checking would help to curtail that. Now, I mean, the same arguments made about why, about including fighting in the game, right? So it's a double-edged sword. Ultimately, I think the point is, because the women's game is different, it's always compared to the men's game, and the men's game is what is celebrated and will forever be an inferior product in the eyes of many. And that one way to curtail that may make that change is if women played by the same rules. Now, also I didn't have time to go into it, but what we hashed out in that paper was rugby is fascinating because men and women play by the same rules, but the games are rarely compared. And it's like they're different styles of playing, and they're valued and celebrated for what they are, which is just so different than hockey.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm not seeing any typed questions yet, which just means I get to roll with more questions. Oh, wait. Give me 1 second here. Oh, yes, I would like to as well. So thank you, Jamie Ryan, for this question. And it begins with a compliment. First of all, I really loved your talk, and I'm a big fan of your work, Professor Weaving. I just cited Checking In my work the other day. So there you go. I would love to hear more about your thoughts on hockey romance novels, which I was trying to write down the titles. And then there's, sorry, a second part. Do you think hockey romance further entrench hockey hypermasculinity or offer a different, perhaps softer form of masculinity? Ooh, interesting question. Thank you for that,
Uh,
Jamie.
So, Jamie, I haven't read, I've read 2 of them, and I've just read they all of a sudden, I only use social media for research purposes, and there must have been something that I clicked on that has now jam my feed with these. It's appearing up on Instagram with these advertisements, and for these books. And the 2 I read, I would not say it was softer masculinity. I'd say it played up into more traditional roles. And in some cases, there's a bit of the woman who tames the very promiscuous male hockey player. And there's a lot of in the 2 that I read, there was a lot of sibling issues. So like there would be the sister of one of the hockey players who would get involved with one of their teammates. And a lot of talk of, I think it just really played up the heterosexual hypermasculine notion. And I'm not quite sure who the audience is, like if that, who exactly that's directed to. But there are also some on football, like all the sports, and there's also a series of these erotic fiction to do with werewolves, that people who become so it's quite bizarre, the whole fan fiction romance novels. But I don't see it as creating change just yet. Oh, I should also quickly point out that there I've come across a few, but I couldn't access them because I got to a paywall and just didn't want to pay for it, set in a homosexual context. So I thought that would be interesting to see if that decreases homophobia, or if it provides, or if it's just playing into stereotypes.
I'm sensing a grad research project about these hockey romance novels. Our next question is one that is commonly asked of hockey researchers, so maybe you'll be ready for this one. Can you theorize how or if what you detail is specifically about hockey and sport? So I think some of the gendered constructions and expectations of masculinity, or put differently, what you describe happens in many spheres of life. Is there something specific about hockey sport that contributes to what you describe?
It's something specific. Sorry, something just popped up here. Something specific to, is it specific to hockey?
Yeah, so they've used the hockey / sport. So I think you could either speak about sport culture more broadly or hone in on hockey, however you'd like to take up that question.
In this presentation, I would say like the theories that I used, I think apply specifically to hockey. In some cases, like the feel good, play good, that's a narrative that you see across women's sport. It's not just reserved for hockey, this idea of emphasizing one's heterosexuality, one's femininity. But some of the other theories I think are specific to hockey, like talking about the ice girls, talking about body checking. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. And I was just typing to the person as well. I know that Teresa and I were asked the very similar question at the end of our talk as the first talk, and Teresa spoke specifically about the national status of the sport. And so while other sports certainly do have hypermasculinity as part of it, the fact that nationalism and hockey are entrenched can produce some specific elements within hockey culture.
It's interesting when I go to international conferences, though, like it's only Canadians who are talking about hockey and analyzing it, where other, looking at masculinity development and gender construction appears like in football, in what we call soccer, that those are at international conferences, those are the sports that are targeted most, and then the NFL. So I really find that Canadians are doing, and I think that is tied to Canadian identity, and I think that we do have a passion for the game and we want to improve it and see change. So that's why we research it as well.
Thank you so much. There was a comment in the chat from Christy letting folks know that there is a PhD student from, I don't know if you said
Waterloo.
where. Waterloo.
University
Oh,
of Waterloo.
do you know about this? Do you want to say a little bit about
Yeah,
it?
I was the external on this. Elise Viss just defended a remarkable, good PhD dissertation on real person fan fiction and hockey real person
Oh.
fan fiction. It's super awesome, and I'm encouraging her I'm encouraging them to get a book out as soon as they can. I think it's going to be fabulous. So.
And then they just got
plug.
to mix it in with the others, right? Sneak it in.
Yeah. Oh my God. The work is hilarious. It's amazing and very funny.
Yeah.
I have a question since I have
perfect.
the floor too. I was wondering, so I've been thinking about this a lot, like women's hockey, men's hockey, the cultures are so different. And I think that, I mean, I don't know that we can attribute that to gameplay as much as to just gender, but are there any, if we're thinking about challenging and changing men's elite level hockey culture, what can we steal from the women's game and give to the men to make it better?
I'll start with the university level. I wonder if part of the problem is they haven't struggled or had to fight for everything. So where I'm going with this is I wonder if the attitude about women's hockey is also part of the problem, that they've always had to fight for opportunity to get ice time, to even get a team. If they're playing mixed, to have adequate change rooms. We're still seeing stories that what Haley Wickenheiser experienced in the early 90s. So sometimes I wonder if, and then I look at our university teams and the funding structure and the alumni support, and perhaps and the game times, not having the prime times, not having concessions, not having a beer, that I wonder when you operate in that we're fighting for our existence, whether it just kind of changes your attitude versus we have everything. We don't need to fight for everything. It's handed to us. So I've been thinking about that and wondering if that kind of plays in.
Yeah, I think that the privilege that happens so young, right? It's really hard to shake that off by the time you become 18. Yeah. Thank you.
And I'm speaking anecdotally, not evidence-based, but as a ringette player turned hockey player, one thing I anecdotally noted is that a lot of the people that start off hockey later in life as females can sometimes perform a hyper toxic masculinity themselves when they enter the sport. And that was an interesting noticing that I found in my my own hockey career. Fred had noted in the chat that that the idea of the novels goes back to the cowboy romance, and that apparently that there is also lesbian sport romance novels about soccer that his own daughter is into. So I wonder that this sport romance genre is
it's massive. It's massive. Yeah.
Excellent. If I could ask you one more broad, and you've definitely demonstrated the significance of all three of the themes, but I wanted to go back to where you started your presentation, and you said that there is joy in the game, and I would absolutely agree, and that it is worth fighting for. And I wonder how you think putting these three themes on display for folks can help us get there. Because I think often people say, no, they resist and reject that these elements exist, but it's hard to reject when you're putting those elements of power and gender policing and sexism and misogyny on display as you are. And how does this help us get to the better game we're fighting for?
I think my guess is that the people who are participating have already bought in. So like, this isn't the crowd we're trying to convince. But I do find, and this, transfers to my teaching, that when you can hear about it, but when I find visuals really powerful, because when you see it, it can help drive home what the issues are. And so I think it's, for me, a lot of the main problem is people don't realize the extent, like a lot of people think now, women's hockey is done. There's no more fighting. There's a professional league. It's setting record attendance. Well done. And not realizing all the other layers to it. And that's the biggest struggle with any kind of feminism in sport, is how do you reach the people who don't want to even believe that there are issues? And I think it's lecture series like this, and moving beyond journal publications, because that's also for a very niche audience. So writing in mainstream, and, you know, a lot of people in this room do a lot of work, of advocacy work and media, because it's important to get that message out.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that plug for people being public intellectuals in this moment. So we are getting research informed opinions into the discussion. If there are no more questions, I'll just ask, Shar, is there anything you wish you would have had a chance to say that you haven't had the opportunity in this hour?
Lots. Yeah.
All right. So thank you for joining us. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, February 28th. And it's with Christine Cito, and the topic is fostering anti-racism in the rink. And that will occur at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. So make sure that you are joining Atlantic time. These recordings are all up on the YouTube page of, and if I can multitask, which I haven't been doing well, I'll put the main link again in the chat. And then I know when I was searching around for it, when I was on that page, I believe that going through this link or just putting in the name of the speaker series into their YouTube channel, you can find all of the previous webinars that we have hosted already in this series. So thank you everybody for joining. I don't know, Christy, if you want to pop in and say anything else, or if we're good to go here.
No, I just want to say thank you for such an important and engaging talk, and it's lovely to see you, and thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you next month.
Yes.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day or night, wherever you are.
Thank you, Shar.